Directors of big businesses, if you are thinking about setting up a car salary sacrifice scheme in your business, we are going to be explaining all the things you need to know about how salary sacrifice works, how you set it up, the things that can go wrong, the things that can go right, everything you need to know. Just to introduce ourselves, we're from a business called Vehicle Consulting. We specialize in setting up salary sacrifice schemes within businesses, big and small. My name's Tom. I am the head of marketing at Vehicle Consulting. I'm joined by Mike. Mike, would you just like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, no problem at all. I'm Mike. I'm the salary sacrifice solutions leader at Vehicle Consulting.
Yes. So I'm going to be interviewing Mike, asking him a lot of questions, as I said, about salary sacrifice, specifically for large business directors, whether it's the finance director, HR director, managing director, any of the directors or above, really. If you're not a director, you can still watch it as well, of course. Now, Mike, let's just get into it. So can you explain to me, from the point of view of a director of a large business, how does salary sacrifice work for that business?
Yeah, no problem at all. So salary sacrifice in itself, it's an employer benefit which is offered to your employees. Essentially what it does is it allows them to forego a gross element of their salary, very similar to pension contributions, cycle to work schemes. And by giving up a gross element of the salary, in return, they get an electric vehicle. Now, the reasons why employers are offering this to employees is, first of all, it's distinctly cheaper than an employee going to do is using their net salary after tax to go and source a vehicle. The savings is sort of the main reason why it's offered out to employees. From employers, there's numerous benefits in regards to obviously staff retention, ESG reporting, which obviously I'm sure we'll touch upon on this video.
Okay, so essentially it's enabling your staff to lease a car and pay for it with their pre-tax earnings. That's the key part of it, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And through doing that, they save on income tax, national insurance, and then there's other benefits to it as well.
Okay, well, I want to know kind of, is it worth it? So I want to, you've mentioned a couple of ways of comparing it to different ways of paying for a car. So I want to just go into that in a bit more detail. So a lot of companies have company car schemes, or they might have a car allowance. Why would they want salary sacrifice instead of something like that?
Yeah, so the reason why you'd want salary sacrifice, not necessarily instead of that, I'd probably say alongside a company car and car allowance, it goes hand in hand. And the reason being is essentially because you're allowing an employee to use their gross salary as opposed to their net to source a vehicle personally. For example, if they're getting a salary, they don't take the car allowance, which might be £500, pay 20 or 40% tax or even 45% tax on that, and then use that net salary to source a vehicle. They're actually using the total amount to use it through salary sacrifice because it's done at a gross level. So it's allowing your employees to basically make their salary go further and get them more vehicles. Now, it goes without saying that the salary sacrifice scheme tends to work predominantly best with full electric vehicles. However, there is some other vehicles which may sort of fit into the scheme, such as plug-in hybrids, for example. It is predominantly for them. And the reason being is because it's a salary sacrifice car, it's still leased with the employer. So it does attract benefit in kind tax to the vehicle, which for electric vehicles at the minute is really low at 2%. Plug-in hybrids is still low, but it is a sliding scale. But at the minute, petrol and diesels, the benefit in kind is just too high for it to work.
Okay, so it doesn't really work for petrols and diesels. Works okay for plug-in hybrids. Works really well for electrics. You see a lot of these salary sacrifice schemes banded around called electric car salary sacrifice schemes specifically. Yeah. Why is it? Is it like that? Is it only electrics on all salary sacrifice schemes, or what can you do if you do it through Vehicle Consulting, for example?
Exactly. So it's not the same with all the people that offer this. Some people specifically only offer electric vehicles. And the reason being is the benefit in kind is lower. And as a scheme, it does just work best for electric vehicles. Now, that's not to say there's still a benefit with plug-in hybrid. Although the benefit in kind is higher, the saving on income tax and national insurance still tends to massively offset what you're paying back in benefit in kind tax.
Yeah.
So it does stack up really well for them. Now, with ourselves, we offer both because we want, essentially, if you offer both, there's more take up in the scheme. And like I say, we understand that not everyone, although most people can run electric vehicles, not everyone's circumstances allow them to run full electric vehicles.
Would you say that it's fair to say that, a lot of people aren't ready for electric cars? You're probably going to get more interest and uptake and people actually using the scheme if you're able to offer plug-in hybrids as a business to your staff.
Yeah, exactly. Although electric is massively on the rise in terms of vehicles, and I think once the education is done correctly, I think a lot of people are just less necessarily more reluctant to go to electric vehicles. I think a lot of people's driving profiles actually allow them to go to electric. They just don't want to make that jump. However, plug-in hybrid is a really good option, sort of sit in that middle ground, because you can use the vehicle as a full electric. And what it sort of does is like a baby steps into it and gives you an idea how electric vehicles work. and then perhaps in 2-3 years you can then make the jump to full electric.
Perfect. Okay, I just want to compare the salary sacrifice scheme to see if it is worth it to another couple of ways of paying for a car. How does it compare to leasing a car personally?
So in regards to leasing a car personally, it's going to be significantly better because you're using your gross earnings. So essentially what you'd do is, if you were going to do it personally, you'd take your salary, you'd have your income tax, national insurance, everything taken off it, and then you're using your net salary to go to a dealership, get a price lease, and you're using your net salary. That's the key thing here. With a salary sacrifice scheme and doing it through the business, you're essentially using your gross salary before deductions. So essentially you're using a bigger pot of salary to essentially to source it, and it's before income tax and national insurance deductions.
Yeah. So it's pretty much, it's a no contest between leasing personally and salary sacrifice, is it really?
Distinctly cheaper.
Okay. How does it compare to, I mean, one of the most popular ways of getting a car for people who may want a new or a newish car is they might say, right, I want a 3-year-old car, I'm going to get that on PCP. How does it compare to that?
So it's really interesting. We get this question asked quite a lot. And the thing is, with a PCP agreement, essentially, it tends, for most people, or 95% of people, it tends to be a lease anyway. Because essentially with a PCP agreement, you sort of lease the vehicle for 3 years, and then at the end you get an option to pay the balloon to own the vehicle or hand the vehicle back. Now, most people do the 3-year thing, do the 3-year part of it, but then never actually go forward with the balloon payment. So essentially, it's very similar to a lease agreement, but it attracts APR because there's an option to buy and there's interest attracted to it. So if you're comparing it to that, what we've actually done, we have done some examples sort of recently, is shown that it actually works out because of the income tax savings, national insurance, and obviously because it's leased for a business, it allows us to use business terms on the back of your company. So we can actually source these vehicles with massively increased discounts anyway. And then when you stack it on top of the income tax, national insurance savings, it ends up being significantly cheaper than what a PCP would be. And that's for a brand new vehicle, which tends to be fully maintained as opposed to sort of leasing a personal vehicle.
Yeah, this is what no one ever believes us when we talk about this, where we basically say that a PCP, a used PCP car is often more expensive than a brand new one on salary sacrifice. But I mean, when you add all those things up, it does actually work out, especially the part about paying for it before with your pre-tax earnings, especially if you're a 40 or a 45% taxpayer. Okay, and what about if, again, people who might just go to a dealership and think, I'll just get it from there? Is it going to be, I mean, which is better? Do it through a dealership? Why would I go through salary sacrifice?
I mean, ultimately, from a personal employee's point of view, there's numerous reasons why you might opt into salary sacrifice in regards to reducing your carbon footprint. But most people just want to pay less for a vehicle.
Yeah.
I'm looking for a car, I want the cheapest route to get into it. And ultimately, this is the cheapest route.
Yeah.
So when you're comparing it to a dealership, I mean, all these vehicles are sourced from, if it's a BMW, it's sourced from BMW. If it's an Audi, it's sourced from Audi. They're all sourced from the same place. It's just using our terms, done through salary sacrifice, leverage through the business, and that's where all the savings are coming from.
But could you go into a dealership and have a look at a car and go, yeah, that's great, can I do that on salary sacrifice, please?
No, unfortunately not. I mean, all this obviously is done through a business. The
Right.
vehicle is leased through the business name, which means you wouldn't able to just walk into this and say, I'm going to do this, this option. It has to be an offer or a benefit which is offered from your employer. Got it.
Okay, so let's talk about how much is going to cost the business. That's the one thing business directors are going to want to know. So how much does it cost to set up?
Absolutely, and it's a really good question. Now, once again, it probably depends on which supplier you go with. With ourselves, it costs absolutely nothing for an employer to set up this scheme. And to run it throughout, it works out completely net neutral. In most cases, obviously, because employees are foregoing a gross element of their salary, on paper, your employees are giving up a gross element of salary, which means on paper they're earning less. Which means as a business, you're actually saving national insurance on their salary. So if you actually ran the scheme, the scheme would actually make money. Now, a lot of employers decide to pass the NI savings back or redistribute the cost into a place to offer even a bigger benefit to employees. But ultimately, this scheme won't cost you anything, and in some circumstances, it could actually save you money.
So all the costs, the cost of the car is paid for out of the staff salary, so that doesn't affect the business. You're reducing your staff salary, so your national insurance contributions as a business are going to go down, and that's how you can actually, as you said, reduce the amount of money that you're paying out at the moment. The thing is, I mean, people just don't believe us when we say it doesn't cost anything. So the question I've got for you is, how does vehicle consulting make money? If it doesn't cost anything, where does the money come from for your business?
No, it's a good question. I mean, in regards to ourselves, vehicle consulting, we are a broker. We sit with a panel of funders, up to sort of 10, 12 different funders. So when we get a vehicle inquiry, we actually go to these panel of funders and find out the best pricing, which is why we tend to be usually most competitive on pricing as well compared to our other competitors. So we go out to these panel of funders, we get the best price, and they're all asking for our business, and we make money basically by volume of where we put the business.
Okay. Right, got it. So, I mean, you mentioned that you're a broker there. A lot of people hear that and think
it's a dirty word,
yeah,
isn't
it's a dirty word. You're just a middleman. Why would I bother going with you? How do the prices of vehicle consulting cars compared to one of the other big salary sacrifice names out there?
And this is probably the key reason of why you would want to deal with us. It's because we've got to panel funders. Most our other competitors are one finance company. Either they write their own books, or there's only one company or finance company that's ever involved. So their pricing is dictated by one finance company. Whereas with ourselves, we go to a panel of multiple finance companies, and we get the best price, which is currently out there at the moment, which means all the time your employees are getting the best physical pricing for that vehicle.
Okay, so because vehicle consulting has access to all these different finance providers, they're competing basically to get the deal with this business's staff. So they're offering better price. I mean, it's basic economics. More competition means a better price. Whereas some of our competitors, they just have one, so there's no competition. So no competition means a higher price, essentially.
Exactly, and like you say, we go to the panel of funders, and then you'll also get the assurance service from vehicle consulting, whereas we go out, we get the best price, but then it's all comes back down, it's filtered down to us that provide it. It's us that you speak to, and we go through the whole process with you. So it's not like you're speaking to multiple people as well. We go out and do that, and then it all comes down to a central hub, which is us.
Okay, no worries. And right, so we talked about the cost. Doesn't cost anything. Fantastic. The prices of the cars are pretty good through ourselves, although probably recommend, if you're looking for a salary sacrifice provider, have a look around and do compare prices, which we're happy to do compared to other businesses, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you want to go out and get prices, by all means, we're happy to provide pricing to sort of benchmark to show where we're at.
Yep, no worries. Okay, now the other thing that always comes up, a big worry with businesses who think that it sounds fantastic, is what happens if an employee or a number of employees get a car through salary sacrifice and then leave the business? Is that business going to be stuck with a car that they then have to continue having to pay for?
So it's the number one question we get asked, really common, and it's a really fair question to ask. What you don't want to do as an employer is set up this, 20 people opt into it, and then 20 people leave, and you're left with these 20 vehicles, obviously the lease done in the business name. What do we do with them? If it was a business contract hire agreement or a company car, you'd either have to pay the early termination fee or try and redistribute it to your staff. The answer to it is early termination protection. So what it basically is, it's a bolt-on onto the scheme, which covers you in the eventuality that your staff members leave, go on maternity, paternity, long-term sickness. It covers all these eventualities. So if an employee does take the scheme and then leaves the business, you're not left liable for that early termination fee.
And how is that paid for? Is it like a monthly payment?
Yeah, so it's a bolt-on onto the product. It's done as a gross deduction, and all of these calculations are borne by the employee. So when your employee or yourself opts into the scheme, you get a physical gross deduction, and built into that is the early termination protection if your company's asked for it. Obviously, it goes without saying, if you don't take this, you are liable for that. So it's really popular to take early termination protection.
And how do businesses do it? They kind of say, right, every employee who gets a car through the scheme, you have to have it with this early termination protection, and they just kind of make it mandatory. Is that how people tend to do it?
What we do is when we set up a company, we have a sort of an onboarding, and we sort of get the key people in the room and understand what sort of scheme you want to offer to your employees. So we'd go through what sort of early termination protection you'd want. Do you want vehicle insurance, for example, built into the scheme? Do you want to pass the NI savings back to your employee? Once we've agreed all this, we then go away and build the system in accordance with that.
Okay.
So when your employees actually go onto the scheme, obviously it's clearly listed what's included, but that's already pre-agreed. It's not something they can decide, oh, I want it, I don't want it. Yeah. It's fixed into the scheme, obviously, of what's been agreed for at the implementation.
If you were a big business and you were considering getting salary sacrifice, would you go for this early termination protection?
Absolutely, without a doubt. It's something which I think should be included for large businesses, just because obviously we want to offer this benefit, and it's a great benefit, but at the same time you want peace of mind as an employer that you've got the protection as well. And what we find is most employees actually want this as well, because what they don't want to be is be bound by it, or say, well, if you do leave the company, you've got to pay half the remaining rentals, etc. So employees are just as willing to take this cost on as well as employers, and it's all done at a gross level as well. So you actually you still get your 20, 40, 45% tax saving on that cost as well.
Yeah, I think like a lot of employees do worry about, as you said, what will happen if they leave the business, and it just gives them peace of mind. It's perfectly black and white what's going to happen, and it's likely that it's going to make the uptake of the scheme higher. Would you say?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, obviously, the more benefits you offer, the more selection, plug-in hybrids, vehicle electric, the more take you're going to get in the scheme.
Okay, no worries. Let's move on. Say a business wanted to get salary sacrifice with yourselves. How does vehicle consulting compare to some of the other big salary sacrifice schemes out there? Because there are a few out there.
Yeah,
we haven't necessarily got the big name.
No, exactly. I mean, we're not as big as some of the other competitors out there. What I probably would say about ourselves is we are more tailorable, if that is a word. And basically, what we do is when we sort of implement any customer, we get them on a call. It's more face to face. We understand what needs they have as a company. Obviously, we're quite flexible. We've actually got multiple early termination protection offerings, so we're not just sort of a one size fits all like other sort of competitors. And we build a system to exactly what you need. We build dedicated FAQs specifically to your company. Everything's got that sort of hands-on approach, whereas some of it can be quite generic, and it's not necessarily. It comes across as a bit distant to your business, like this is what's being offered. Whereas when we do it, it's more of a connection. As well as that, being smaller, our staff do tend to be more knowledgeable about electric vehicles. Like I say, we are as a company fully electric. Everyone in the company, we all drive electric vehicles. We've all driven a lot. We know about them. We're a lot more on hand to answer questions. So if you've got queries about electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, what you'll find is when you offer the scheme, this tends to be the first steps into having an electric vehicle for some employees, and they want to ask questions about it. So although, yes, we offer electric vehicles and they're cheap, they might ask general questions like, how do I charge an electric vehicle? What do I do here? How do I do this? And we're on hand to answer that, whereas other competitors, it's literally just sort of a system where this is the offer. Do you want it, yes or no? I'd like to think we're a bit better in that regard as well.
What about in terms of how you educate the staff and how it works?
Yes, so it goes without saying, whenever we implement a company, we do obviously education, as mentioned, we build FAQs, we build driver guides to explain it through them. Now, the driver guides tend to be split up into 3 categories. It tends to be questions relating to vehicle, it tends to be questions related to sort of tax and how does it affect my tax code, and then we get general sort of financial questions, or how do I operate the scheme? It goes through these 3 key periods, and we answer them questions there.
Okay.
As well as that, what we also do is we do sort of face-to-face meetings. We do closed-off webinars to talk people through. Obviously, some people or some employees never actually look at gross salary. Most employees tend to see what's usually in the bottom right of the payslip and work off that, whereas this isn't at a gross level, so it is a deduction like a pension contribution, which some employees might not understand. So what we do is very similar to like this. We'll do sort of closed-off webinars with your employees. Sometimes we come out and do face-to-face. We bring vehicles for the employees to have a look at, and we talk about it and we go through it with them so they're educated. So when they do opt into the scheme, we don't get the usual questions a month after when they look at the payslip and like, what's this? I don't understand it. We sort of do all the implementation at the first, and by that we find that we drive a lot more take up into the scheme as well.
Yeah, we have actually got lined up with one of our clients. We're going to basically do something exactly like this at a town hall meeting, basically explaining it. And that, I mean, I think that's going to be brilliant for educating the staff and how all that works. Now, you say that, look, it's tailorable. We try and focus on educating the staff. We have a lot of videos. That's kind of what we do. Why is all that so important?
I mean, it's important because it's educating the employees. I mean, ultimately, this is a benefit. It's a gross deduction. Employees don't. So some employees don't understand gross deductions, but more so, if you're offering a benefit for a company, there's not much point of offering a benefit without any take up. It's sort of what's the point? So you go for all this sort of effort to implement a salary sacrifice scheme, and if you're getting no take up, which we have sort of people which have sort of implemented in the past, have actually come away from larger suppliers because they found they've had no take up for various reasons, whether that's price, whether that's service, whether it's lack of education as well. So the reason why we find all this important is because when you launch this benefit, we want as much take up as possible.
You say as well, I mean, maybe it would take a bit more time in understanding how it works. So it'd take a little bit more time, as opposed to some of the other big suppliers out there. They say, yeah, we can get you set up in 2 days. We'll send you a link and a PDF guide and you're away. Would you say that racing into it like that is basically asking for things to go wrong, essentially?
Completely, yeah. Like I say, we tend to say for larger companies, we tend to say 4 to 6 weeks, more so because we want to understand why you're implementing it. For example, say this schemes are predominantly for electric vehicles, and you might say as a company, well, we need to reduce our CO2 output, and by reduce, we want to go carbon neutral, and by doing that, plug-in hybrids might not be an option for you. So we'll tailor the scheme to understand what your needs are. You might be doing this because you want to reduce your carbon footprint. You might want to do this for staff retention. There's various different reasons why you'd launch a scheme, and we need to understand that in order to build the best scheme for your company and tailor everything around that to sort of drive uptake in it.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, this isn't a perfect scheme, is it? There are things that can go wrong, especially if your staff aren't educated. So I want to focus on that in particular right now. So things that can go wrong with salary sacrifice. So the first thing is pensions. What's the situation with how it can affect your pension?
So it's a great question, and once again, it's probably one of the key ones we get asked. Obviously, it is a gross deduction to someone's salary, which means on paper they are earning less, which means in terms of a pension contribution, this could affect their pension. Now, it doesn't always. It's worth checking with an employer, or like say when we initialize a meeting, we have a conversation in regards to this. Some employers decide to top up their wage to what they call the nominal salary, so they don't. So this is before deduction, so it doesn't actually affect the pension. But the answer is this could affect an employee's pension. We need to agree that before we launch the scheme.
So in terms of it going wrong, I mean, an employee could get a car through salary sacrifice and not know this information and then go, oh, it's affecting my pension, and then they're not happy and you've got an HR problem on your hands.
Exactly.
How would you avoid that in that case?
But I mean, that is just an education piece, really, that I think, if I say, when we before we launch the scheme, like I say 2-3 weeks before, we do these education pieces. We explain this to show them what's going to be affected, how it's going to affect it, and we work from there. Like I say, another common problem which you've mentioned on that goes hand in hand is benefit in kind tax. Now, although this is an employee benefit and this vehicle is intended to be used for business use, intended to be used for personal use, not necessarily business use, what we find is that employees aren't aware that it attracts benefit in kind, which then affects their tax code, for example.
Okay.
And this is another thing which we educate. So obviously, in the eyes of HMRC, it gets branded as a company car. It does attract benefit in kind because it's a taxable benefit, which means your tax code will be affected by taking one of these vehicles. Now, on an electric vehicle, it's a 2% benefit in kind. It's going to be very minimal. But we need to educate your employees to make sure they're aware of this. So once again, it all comes down to getting their payslip at month one and saying, I don't understand any of this.
Yeah, exactly. We get a lot of comments on our videos, people saying that this affected my tax code, and that they didn't expect it, clearly. So it's obviously that kind of thing is going to panic staff, isn't it? And that's what you want to avoid. And I guess you do it again by education.
Yeah, and like you say, it's probably less with electric vehicles because the benefit in kind is very minimal at 2%, and that doesn't matter whether it's a 30 grand car or a 100 grand car.
Yep.
Where it probably raises its head more is if you are offering plug-in hybrids and petrols, they can vary from 5% all the way to sort of 18-20%.
Yep.
So if you're taking a vehicle which you thought because it said it was a hybrid, it's going to be a benefit. You could be getting a vehicle with a really high benefit in kind, and then it is going to really affect your tax code, and that's probably where it ends up worse for most people.
Okay. If you wanted to avoid a big change in people's tax code, would you maybe limit some of the plug-in hybrids, because some of them have slightly higher benefit in kind rates, don't they?
Exactly, yeah, and they don't really make it very clear as well. Like you say, a lot of vehicles now claim to be hybrid, and hybrid basically means that there's some form of electric element working alongside the petrol engine. What you really want for the scheme is plug-in hybrids, which is PHEV, which basically means the electric motor can run on its own with the petrol or combustion engine turned off. Now, the problem is with that is it's just a sort of a sliding scale. It goes off CO2 emissions it produces and the electric range it can travel as a full electric vehicle.
Right.
And this affects the benefit in kind tax code. So like you say, the lowest you can get is like 5%, and it goes all the way to sort of 18-20% on some vehicles. But what we'd want to know is obviously, and we would have this conversation with your employees to let them know if they were looking to go plug-in hybrid, if there's options which are potentially better for them, rather than just picking the vehicle which they like.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, now another thing that can go wrong with salary sacrifice, this is a kind of thing that only kind of insiders like you and me kind of know about. It's not very publicized. It is something called accelerated payments. Explain to me what that is.
Yeah, so accelerated payments are essentially what we would refer to as sort of front loading a contract. So what it basically means is your gross deduction changes throughout the contract. So to make it more simple with ourselves, if you opt into salary sacrifice, just say your gross deduction was £500 a month, it would stay £500 a month for free. If you took the vehicle for 3 years, it'd be the same gross deduction for 3
Every
years.
single month.
Nothing would change. Now with accelerated payments, what you'd probably see is sort of in the first 6 months, your payment could be £750, and then from months 8 till 16 it could be £550, and then right at the end of the contract it then could reduce to £400. But what a lot of people advertise is just an average cost. So you might log into it and see an average cost of, oh, it's costing me £520.
Yep.
Great, I want it. But what you don't realise is actually your salary is going to be getting sort of hammered in the first 6 months because the gross deductions are so large.
Yeah, this is going to be a problem because A, it's going to be difficult for the employees to know what they're going to be billed each month.
Yeah.
B is going to be a nightmare for payroll or whoever's managing payroll because they're going to have to change it every single month potentially for every single member of staff for 3 years, or however long the contracts are. And there was another one. Oh, yeah, that's it. If they're not expecting, I mean, a lot of staff don't realize this is happening. And I know that for a fact because I've seen people comment it on our videos. They didn't realize that it's accelerated payments. They've just looked at the average payment
And thought that's the amount.
Exactly.
Like you say, it is a big problem, and I would steer clear of anything accelerated payments. It's much easier, and like you say, from an employer's point of view, in implementing this scheme, it's a lot easier for HR. Like you say, we want this to be as little stress on HR as possible. We do all the work. We provide payroll reportings. We do all the work. Ultimately, the only thing we can't do is physically deduct your employees' salaries. We provide all the information to do so. And what we don't want is sort of HR jumping in every month to change someone's gross deductions, like say, back and forward to reflect it. What we want is HR to log in, implement a deduction, set a recurring payment for 3 years, and then leave it. That's done.
Yeah, exactly. So there is one big salary sacrifice brand out there, one of the biggest ones who does this, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
Would you say, look, ask if they do it, if you're thinking about going with the salary sacrifice provider, ask if they do these accelerated payments and maybe avoid?
Yeah, I mean, there's no right or wrong who you decide as a company to deal with.
Yep.
What I would say, though, is from my point of view, I think accelerated payments isn't something which you should do. And you should ask if they do it just as a sort of a flat fixed rate throughout. I think it causes too much confusion.
Yep. Okay. What about the next thing I want to move on to in terms of like this kind of, not necessarily hidden fees, but something people don't necessarily know about, damage fees. How do they work?
Yeah, so ultimately in the Artemis Party, the actual contract is a business contract hire agreement. So at the end of the lease, the vehicle is going to go back. And if there's damage on that vehicle, you will as a company be billed for that damage. Now, we can write into our contracts to recharge the damage, but ultimately we want to try and avoid that or nip it in the bud sooner rather than later. But it is something to be aware about.
Okay, but that's kind of standard with any car lease, isn't it? If there's damage at the end.
Yeah, irrespective of who the vehicle's with, whether it's a company car, whether it's a salary sacrifice vehicle, at the end, if there's damage on the vehicle, and when I say damage, obviously, all these vehicles are governed by the BVRLA. There is a fair wear and tear guide. They don't expect these vehicles to go back as if they were showroom condition 3 years ago. They do expect a certain amount of damage to it. We're talking about serious dents to the sides and everything. That will be recharged as it would be with anyone. Now, probably to go on to that, where we're a bit different is obviously we do mileage checks, which I'm sure you'll lead on to, but we also do, touch base 6 months before. We ask for a damage report of the vehicle. We ask the driver to fill it out, and then we give advice of whether it's best to return that vehicle like that or whether we advise them to go and get it repaired for what's going to work out cheapest for your employees.
Oh, that's good. And okay, so you mentioned checking up on the mileage. So this is, again, something that could potentially go wrong is, if it's not managed correctly, is the excess mileage fees. Explain to me what excess mileage fees are.
Yes, so whenever you take a contract through salary sacrifice, you'd log into our portal and you'd select the mileage parameter which you think you're going to do. I'm going to do 10,000 miles a year for 3 years. So they expect that vehicle, the finance company expect that vehicle to go back in 3 years on 30,000 miles. If it's over mileage, they will charge you an excess mileage fee for that.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, the driver has to pay the miles they're driving, come what may.
Yeah.
Would you say that it's commonplace for people to maybe select slightly lower mileage than they actually drive to get the price down?
I'd like to think not as much anymore, but it isn't uncommon for an employee to realise that if they pick, I'm doing 5,000 miles a year as opposed to 10,000 miles a year, the payments significantly reduced because ultimately the contract's cheaper.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, what we want to avoid is having a great big lump sum excess mileage fee at the end, don't we? So
Yeah.
So how do you avoid that? Sorry.
So in regards to that, what we do is we do biannual mileage checks.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do is when an employee gets a vehicle at 6 months, we'll ask for the first mileage check. We'll get an idea of what mileage they're at there. And then at 12 months, we'll get another one. And then from there, 12 months, we can usually have a good indication of how we're tracking for the duration of the contract. So we'll say, oh, drivers doing fine, we don't need to do anything. They're massively under mileage.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps we should rewrite a contract to reduce their mileage to save them money.
Okay.
We can do it that way, and it also works the other way. If they're massively over mileage, we can increase the contribution per month, so you're not stung with a massive bill at the end of the contract.
Okay. So yeah, you'll find out. I mean, at 6-month periods throughout the contract, you can keep track of it and adjust it as you go. Yeah. Okay, well, that sounds fair enough. I was going to move on to tax code changes, but you've covered that already. So let's move on to talking about what the pay slip will actually look like. A lot of people just don't get how the payments work and how it affects their pay slip. Yeah. So can you just describe to me if someone gets a car through salary sacrifice, what's their pay slip going to look like?
So obviously everyone's pay slip looks slightly different of how it's displayed.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you'll get your gross salary, or basically what you've been paid before any tax deductions, income tax, national insurance. You'll get it paid. Then you have any deductions, such as perhaps a pension contribution, cycle to work scheme, or in this case, salary sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
So then you'd have your gross salary minus the amount of whatever you've decided to opt for salary sacrifice. And then once that's been done, that amount that's left is then what you're taxed upon.
Okay.
Which is where your income tax savings, your national insurance tax savings are done. So then you do your income tax, national insurance, and then you get your net salary, what you're left with after all deductions.
So this is all the payments are done within your pay slip.
Yes.
So there's no, I mean, a lot of people think that there's a direct debit to their bank account, but that's not how it works, is it?
No, this is all done at payroll. To do anything through salary sacrifice are also done through PAYE. Like you say, it's a gross deduction done at the source. There's no direct debits to your bank account or anything like that. And
as you said earlier, the benefit in kind is paid for by adjusting the person's tax code.
Exactly, yeah. Now, depending as an employer, depending on how you do it, there's two different ways you can do it. You can either payroll your benefits, where you increase the gross deduction to incorporate the benefit in kind tax, and you do that as a gross deduction, so then you don't have to report the vehicle to HMRC.
Okay.
Alternatively, what's most common, and what most people do, same with a company car, contact HMRC, you fill in the details on the vehicle, and then the tax code is adjusted to reflect the vehicle that they're driving.
Okay.
You can do that as an employer. Most employers do it for them. We can obviously help with this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Most employers do this. However, if you want to, you can ask your staff members to do this themselves. It is an employee benefit. Ultimately, it is their responsibility to inform HMRC about their vehicle.
Okay, let's talk cars. Business directors are watching this. What cars are, maybe earning a nice bit of money? What cars are people on a business directors going for?
Yeah, so business directors, they tend to go for higher value vehicles, and the reason being is not necessarily because it tends to go with what they're currently driving, and most of them tend to have company cars, leased through the company, and then when they actually compare it, it's like, well, I'm driving a 5 Series now, but I can get vehicles like Porsche Taycan, and it's costing me no more money. And that tends to be the switch. So we get vehicles like Porsche Taycan in terms of full electric, a lot of Audi Q8s,
mm-hmm.
BMW iX, BMW i5, vehicles like that. They're full electric, obviously, but then to go again, we get a lot of orders on, for example, Range Rover Sport,
mm-hmm.
for example, the plug-in hybrid variant. And the reason being is you think that would have a really high benefit in kind tax code, but it doesn't. It's actually one of the lowest at 5%. So you're getting this really nice Range Rover Sport, and you're paying still a very low benefit in kind tax code.
Okay, what about people who are not necessarily on, a big wedge? Just like your average average Joe. What are they?
It tends to be the T. It tends to be Tesla, which is most commonly, by far and away, the most common vehicle that's ordered through Salsac.
Yep.
Model 3, Model Y. They're probably the two most commonly ordered vehicles. But as well as that, like I say, we get BMW i4s. We get a lot of Mercedes EQA, Mercedes EQB, SUV electric vehicles, sort of family-sized vehicles, which have mm-hmm. good range. They're really popular. And then obviously we get other people which might not. The census splits into two. You get people which have got a certain amount of money and they want to get the best car they can for that. Or some people just want to find the cheapest route into electric vehicles. We get a lot of orders on vehicles such as MG ZS, for example, which is a really good car, really well received. Hyundai Kona, really well received cars in terms of what car. I think Hyundai Kona was. I think it was what car of the year.
That was MG4.
Yeah, one of them was. But really well reviewed cars, and they're really cheap through salary sacrifice. So they're actually looking at it thinking, well, I need a car, I need it to have this range. It's a great car, and it's costing me £200-300 a month less.
Yeah,
so why
exactly.
wouldn't I?
So would you say that some people use this to save money, but some say, right, well, I want to keep my payments about the same as what I'm paying now, but I can now get a much nicer car?
Absolutely. They're sort of the two categories of what it splits into. Some people, it's literally, I need a car of this size. I want the cheapest option available. I want to save money. I don't want to spend what I'm currently saving. And that works really well in that regard. Other people, it's like, well, I'm paying £500 a month now. What can I get for £500 a month? And it tends to be a significantly more expensive car for the same amount of money.
Okay. And last thing I want to talk about is chargers. Yes. Is there like a free charger with the scheme? Can you get a charger? Talk me through that.
It answers the question. We can build a charger into the scheme. If you want to, we can do that. We don't automatically build it into the scheme. Some other competitors do build it in there, and they said I brand it as free of charge. Obviously, nothing is free of charge.
Basically, the people who aren't getting a charger are paying.
Yeah,
for the
exactly. What we do is sort of like an assumed cost, I would say. So an average install would be sort of £800, but every two people it might be more expensive, and then they take an average cost, and that's sort of how it's relayed across there. What we do when we build it in is, if you want it, you tick it on our system. We would then get in contact with you. We would understand your exact needs of where you're charging it, exactly your install cost, and then we build that into the deduction for you. Okay. So it's like, say, maybe a slightly longer process, not by far. Like, say, it wouldn't take much more than 24 hours, but by doing that, the cost is sort of tailored to yourself, and you're not potentially paying for something because of someone else.
Yeah, okay. And can you go with any electricity provider if you're doing it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're not bound by any electricity provider. We simply control the install of the electric charging unit.
Perfect. Okay, well, I hope that was interesting for all you business directors or not business directors watching this. If you want to get started with salary sacrifice through ourselves, you can book a call with Mike by scanning this QR code just here. That'll take you through to a website where you can choose a time and a date, and you can book a call with Mike. Mike will tell you everything you need to know. We tend to do Teams calls. We tend to find they work best. If you want to include multiple people within that call, you can do that. If you have any questions, whether you're watching this on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever it may be, comment underneath and we will get back to you to answer any questions. I hope that has been useful for you. So thank you very much, Mike.
No, thank you.
Hope you have a fantastic afternoon.